Hi, my name is Yasmin Hernandez, and welcome to my World History of the 20th Century final report. So, for my final report, I'm working on propaganda, specifically propaganda during the First World War. So, propaganda is the use of multimodality in order to influence or promote a certain political cause or point of view. So, propaganda during the First World War was very important, very influential, especially because it was so prevalent within all of the countries involved during the war. It played a huge role of morale during this war, and it just sort of promoted people to support the war, to contribute to this war effort in whatever way possible, or in whatever way they could, or in whatever way the country in specific needed. The thing about propaganda at this time was that it also established this sort of home front, this war being fought by the people who were staying at home, these citizens that were being kept at home. And so, in the words of Philip M. Taylor in his novel Munitions of the Mind, he says, "It became a bloody and relentless struggle in which sustaining morale became just as essential for both sides as sustaining the military effort." And so he's saying how important propaganda was for the contribution of raising morale in these countries. For example, in the case of France, France experienced a mutiny in its troops, which is very dangerous because if your men aren't willing to fight, then who's fighting this war? We also see it in Russia, where morale just collapses and Russia descends into civil war, the Bolshevik Revolution, and withdraws from the war. We also see it in Germany, where morale also collapses, except in the case of Germany, it has to withdraw from the war and, well, the war ends. So the overall aim for this video is to analyze World War I propaganda around the world, see its effects, and basically see what the focus of that country was at the time, which is something you can easily see in the propaganda that's being published. You can see what their focus was. So, France. So, France is interesting because it's one of the first players in the World War. It is one of the first countries that enters the war, and this is because Germany declares war on France on August 3rd, 1914. So, Germany plans during the start of the war, Germany had this Schlieffen Plan. The Schlieffen Plan was to enter France, attack France, encircle Paris, capture the capital, beat France, and then rush Germany to the Eastern Front where they can fight Russia in order to avoid fighting a two-front war. So this was the Germany plan from the start of the war, before they even entered the war. So what Germany felt they needed to do was to get France out of the picture first, so they declared war on France first, and they invaded France. But in order to invade France, they had to go through Belgium. So Belgium at the time was a neutral country. So in doing this and in invading Belgium, Germany was seen as very barbaric, as very inhumane, especially with the brutalities that Belgium had to face when Germany entered. So what there was that Germany felt that everyone was fair game, even civilians. So there was a lot of casualties, civilian casualties. A lot of these people were dying just because they happened to be in the way of German soldiers. What we also see was a destruction of culture. Germany was burning down universities, libraries. And so France depicted Germany as very barbaric, as having these very inhumane way to fight this war. So the propaganda image I chose for France was Lingot de Troupes d'air by Golia, published in 1915. So here is the image. So as we can see, this German is actually the Wilhelm. So the picture denotes him as being very animalistic. He's eating up the world. If you can see his teeth, actually, even being razor sharp is very animal like. He's depicted as being this sort of insatiable creature that is trying to devour the entire world. And this is how France viewed the Germans. They saw them as doing anything in order to get what they wanted. And this is supported by this novel by Fritz Fischer called World Power Decline. Fischer writes that Germany had striven for world dominion and had tried to wrest it from England. So, for some historical context on this, Germany was late for the scramble of Africa during the times of imperialism, so Germany didn't get very many colonies in Africa, which Germany saw as a shame because Germany felt that they too could be a global superpower and that because of this lack of colonizing in Africa, they were at a disadvantage. So they felt that they were in this position to better themselves, to gain world power, to sort of just encapsulate these countries and put them under German rule. And this is depicted a lot in this image that France put out at the time that Germany just sort of wants to take on the entire world and keep it for themselves. So it's very interesting to see how France focused on depicting Germany as the main enemy, and this could probably be traced back to the fact that Germany declared war on France to begin with. This was essentially the start of the war. So, Britain. So Britain is a very interesting thing because Britain was also a major player in this war. Except a lot of the propaganda in Britain is very unusual. It's not what you expect. It's not your typical image or maybe even film or anything. Starting off with the White Feather Campaign. So what the White Feather Campaign was a sort of movement. Specifically, these women were involved in handing out a white feather to boys, to men. Here's an image of a woman handing out a white feather to a man. And what this symbolized was that whenever they saw a man not in uniform, they gave them this white feather to sort of alienate them from the community, to sort of point out, hey, this guy is not fighting this war. This guy is not fighting for us. So this called into question masculinity at the time. It made a lot of men feel shameful of themselves, and many even joined the war in order to avoid receiving this white feather. So it was just a very sort of rude form of propaganda that these women took on to scrutinize these young men. So, another interesting piece of propaganda in Britain at the time was this song by John McCormack called Keep the Home Fires Burning. And I'll play it for you right now, or at least a clip of it. So this song is very interesting. If you really look at the lyrics, yes, it's a cheery song, but there's a deeper message to it. So the lyrics, let no tears add to their hardships as the soldiers pass along, and although your heart is breaking, make it sing this cheery song. What this song is saying is it's telling these women to not hold these men back, to not make it harder for these men to go to the war. It's hard enough as it is. Don't let these tears add to their hardships. Everyone knows that this is a tough price to pay, but it's necessary. And so these women should not be holding these men back. And so they're encouraging women to support these men, to let them go on and fight this war. And another thing that it's saying is, which is the title itself, keep the home fires burning. So this is essentially setting up the home front for these women. It's saying, because these men are going out to fight this war, it is now up to these women to keep the home fires burning. It is up to these women to assume the responsibilities that the men are leaving behind. Now they must provide for the family. Now they must do everything that the man did. It is up to them to essentially keep the home fires burning. So another interesting piece is this poem by Rupert Brooke titled The Dead. Poetry during World War I, and especially in Britain, was very high and very influential. So the poem reads as follows. Blow out, you bugles, over the rich dead. There's none of these so lonely and poor of old, but dying has made us rarer gifts than gold. These laid the world away, poured out the red, sweet wine of youth, gave up the years to be, of work and joy, and that in hope serene, that men call age, and those who would have been their sons, they gave their immortality. Blow, bugles, blow. They brought us for our death. Holiness lacked so long, and love and pain. Honor has come back as a king to earth, and paid his subjects with the royal wage. And nobleness walks in our way again, and we have come into our heritage. So this poem is targeting specifically young men. It's saying sweet wine of youth gave up the years to be. These men are giving up their future years to go fight this war. These young boys are giving up their future for this. Men call age, and those who would have been their sons, they gave their immortality. This is also saying that these young men, presumably those that do not have children, they're giving their life to this. And with this ends their lineage. They're saying it's an honor to die, and it's an honor to die so young. And for these young men, it's even more important because their lineage ends there. They will not have descendants, and they won't pass on their bloodline because they're dying at such a young age. They're giving up their life for the war. But this poem is encouraging these people to do this. They're encouraging the young men to go and fight this war because it's an honor to die, and when they come back, they're bringing this honor with them. And so, in the words of Barbara Stainton in her work of Picture This, World War I, Posters and Visual Culture, she says that the enlistment campaign prior to conscription in 1916 shifted from an emphasis on national honor to one of the gendered humiliation designed to coerce men into volunteering by calling their masculinity into question. So what Steinson is saying here is that there's a shift. Essentially, there's propaganda that involves national honor, like the poem that I just read. And there's also propaganda which is coercing men into volunteering, calling into question their masculinity, which we saw with the White Feather campaign. And this shows just how very polarized British propaganda was at the time. It goes from White Feather campaign, which is women shaming men, to Keep the Home Fires Burning, which is encouraging women to take on the responsibilities of these men, and the dead, which is encouraging young boys to go out and to fight this war. So British propaganda at this time was very just all over the place and very, very influential and played such a big role in the public sphere at the time. So Australia. So as we know, Australia at the time was a British colony. And so this is important because naturally you would expect Australia to fight for Britain. Except the thing is that Australia was divided among Australians that were of British descent and those that were of Irish descent. So those of British descent, as I said in my seventh decade submission, those of British descent were very loyal to the crown. They were loyal to British. They felt that yes, this was a war we needed to fight. Many Australians were seeking a sense of adventure, so of course they wanted to fight this war. But there were also those of Irish descent, and those of Irish descent saw Ireland as a motherland, and they were not supportive of Britain because of British brutalities in Ireland at the time. So this was very interesting because it shows a polarization in anti-conscription propaganda and pro-conscription propaganda. So, in this image of anti-conscription propaganda, as I analyzed before, this man sitting down is depicted as being large. He seems lazy. He's shooting out these bullets that are men. He's sending out these men to go fight this war as he sits comfortably from afar and just is unscathed by the war, unaffected. The gun we see has the word conscription on it, and what this is saying is that conscription is what's going to be sending these men out. It's what's going to be sending these boys out to go and die. And so this box of ammunition has the words single men on there. And this was because pro-conscription propaganda at the time was targeting married men. As we see in this image, Australian nationalists, married men are exempt if the government proposals are carried, but if they are rejected, all will have to go. Vote yes, Mom, or else they'll take Dad. So they're targeting these married men, saying, hey, if you vote for conscription, you won't get called. You'll get to stay home with your wife, with your kids, with your family. So this anti-conscription propaganda is saying that if conscription were to pass, then since married men are exempt, it's these single men that are going to be sent out. And this is important because married men are more likely to have kids. They already have passed on their bloodline. They have descendants. Single men are less likely to have kids, and if these men go to war and they die, their lineage ends there. They have no more to pass on. Their bloodline cuts off. Another thing is this box here with the words, who next? So this is showing that conscription will force these men to go into war. They have no choice. So if someone goes and dies in war, conscription allows them to just grab another boy, another man, send them out into the war. So this very much devalues life. It just makes life meaningless to people. It just makes them feel that this really is a war of attrition, and whoever has more wins. And so conscription will end up devaluing life, and just the words who next just sort of give this sense that these lives don't matter to these generals and to maybe even the government. Russia. So Russia already had a large army. Russia is very heavily populated, so they didn't really have a conscription crisis. What they did need a lot of was money, because of course you need money to finance a war. So in this image, we see a woman working in a factory. The words here say, give everything for the war. Sign up for the 5.5 loan. So what this is saying is it's encouraging people to give everything for the war. In the image, we see the woman who is working in a factory. She is giving her part to the war. Now this image is asking people to give money to finance this war, because that is what is needed. So this is very much encouraging everyone to participate in this, to give everything of them for this war. And so this plays a large part into the demise of Russia during the war, because as we know, Russia falls into civil war. We see the introduction of the Bolshevik Revolution. And this is because a lot of people are being left out. The government is not caring for its citizens as much as it's caring for its soldiers. So, in the words of Philip M. Taylor, again, in Munitions of the Mind, he says that the Bolshevik were able to play upon growing war weariness with their ideological messages through the use of such masterly slogans as peace, land, and bread, and all power to the Soviets. For Lenin and his successors, who owed too much to the successful employment of propaganda in securing war. So what this is saying is that the Bolshevik Revolution brought a refocus onto the common people, to the common man, saying that these people are tired of giving everything to the war, as the image says, and they want their peace back, they want their land back, they want bread, they want their food, they want the government to care into taking care of its citizens, its constituents again, and not caring so much about the war. So Lenin took this into account. The Bolshevik Revolution took this into account. And this is where communism starts forming, where they start focusing on the common man. Or better yet, this is when communism starts forming. And so Lenin knew this. And so Lenin used a lot of propaganda tools to target specifically this, to helping the common man, to helping common people. So what Lenin did was that he was a supporter of schooling and education. And as we see in this image, the bottom reads, "The illiterate is the same as a blind man." So he's saying that a blind man walking off the cliff is the equivalent of an illiterate man. An illiterate man will walk himself off to a cliff. He's essentially blinded to what the government is doing, to the actions against him. So Lenin is putting an emphasis on the Russian citizens to be literate. And so this is very appealing to the people at the time. They want to be literate. They want to gain an education. So it shows how influential propaganda was at the time and how the Bolshevik Revolution was able to take control of the media and sort of put out what the people wanted to hear at the time and what gave rise to communism. For the illiterate. Germany. So, in the words of Joshua D. Johnson in the essay The Battle for the Mind, he writes, Germany placed far less emphasis upon recruiting in its propaganda than did the Allies. The German military was fairly large at the beginning of the war, and since the German government had effectively portrayed their struggle as defensive, the German populace was swept up in nationalistic fervor. Indeed, the primary manifestation of German home propaganda lay more in what was censored than what was being said. German media was closely scrutinized by the government so that most of the civilian population imbibed was positive. Defeats and setbacks were rarely revealed. So, what this is saying is that German censorship played a large role in propaganda. They wanted to put out this sort of image of Germany being superior, as being never defeated. And this is seen a lot in this. So this is actually a movie by Unseren Helden and der Summe. So this film, and is seen in this. This is a film poster promoting the film. So in this movie, it's based on the Battle of the Somme. And in the Battle of the Somme, Germany actually loses this battle. But that doesn't really matter for Germany, because in the movie, German soldiers are depicted as being never exhausted, as always being strong, never being tired or beaten down. They're always seen as victorious, combative, patriotic, as sort of standing strong in the face of defeat. And the enemy, on the other hand, is portrayed as helpless, exhausted, downcast, beaten, just sort of dead, terrible, and it just plays onto the role of how Germany censored propaganda and just always convinced the German population of how superior and how Germany was never really defeated and Germany never really lost. And it just shows how important Germany was to be seen as just sort of this grand thing in the face of these global superpowers. And this was actually a big downfall for Germany because in Hitler's Mein Kampf, he writes how he scrutinizes German government for not putting as much attention to propaganda during World War One, to not giving it as much importance as it should have. And as we know, this is very huge because Hitler then goes on to grow in the political stage, and this connects very much to World War Two. So German strategy at the time wanted at all costs to avoid U.S. entering the war. They felt that if U.S. entered the war, then that was it. That was the end of the war. But there was a lot of German mistakes along the way, which we will see more in the United States portion of the video. So some of the German mistakes we see are unrestricted submarine warfare, the Lusitania, and the Zimmermann telegram. So the United States. Philip M. Taylor writes that propaganda is an ideological war. Its nationalism and identity shape the war, and for many people, their identity is their language. So, in the beginning, when the US was not involved in the war, they heavily relied on British news and British outlets to be informed and kept up with the events of the war. This is because obviously Britain speaks English, so there was no need for translation for the United States. So from the start of the war, the United States was getting a very one-sided view on the war. So their sort of stance on the war was already being formed. So as we know, unrestricted submarine warfare and the Lusitania played a big role in swaying public opinion for the United States at the time. As we know, the sinking of the Lusitania was the sinking of a British ship where 100 American passengers were, and they all died. The unrestricted submarine warfare also played a big role because Germany basically set everyone as fair game. And this resulted in a lot of American merchant vessels being sunk. However, this wasn't enough to draw the US into the war. And in this article by George Harvey, titled Do Your Bit for America, Harvey being the senior editor for the North American Review and a very influential person at the time, he sort of sets out this propaganda piece in which he talks about the Lusitania and unrestricted submarine warfare and everything Germany is doing wrong at the time. Yet he remains that this is not the duty of America. It is not the duty of America to fight this war for the Allies, and instead they must preserve Washington's principles of isolationism and neutrality, and they can achieve this with impartiality, constancy of practice, and self-protection. So George Harvey is basically telling these Americans, yes, all of this is happening, but we must remain neutral. And this is very influential because, as we know, the sinking of the Lusitania occurs in 1915, but the US doesn't enter the war until 1917. So many Americans are holding on to this stance of isolationism. And it remains for the majority of the war. The US is rarely involved in it. However, as we know, the Zimmermann telegram, it could be seen as basically the last straw for the United States. And as we know, the Zimmermann telegram was a telegram sent from Germany to Mexico, encouraging Mexico to sort of distract the United States from entering World War I, sort of ignite a war, and in return, Germany would sort of ally itself with Mexico and support Mexico in case anything ever happened between Mexico and US, and Germany would also help Mexico regain the lands lost to the United States during the Mexican-American War. And so, the thing about this, the reason why the Zimmermann telegram failed was because during the Communications Revolution, London and Britain in specific was the sort of the home to all communication. Any telegram sent out went through London first before going and reaching its destination. So when the Zimmermann telegram was sent, it reached London first. And while it was cryptic, Britain at the time had all German codes and was able to actually read the Zimmermann telegram. So Britain then sent this to the United States, sort of warning them for this. And so with the combination of the Lusitania, the sinking merchant vessels, the telegram, it was hard for the United States to remain with this stance of isolationism. So, as we know, the United States enters the war in 1917, and one of the most iconic, biggest pieces of propaganda in United States history is set out, and this is the I Want You for U.S. Army by James Montgomery Flagg, 1917. And so this image is the iconic Uncle Sam saying, I want you for U.S. Army. Patriotic red, white, and blue. It's just sort of emanating this sense of nationalism. The pointing finger is very accusatory. It's very specific, saying it specifically wants this viewer, this reader, to go and enlist in the army. They want this person in specific. It gives them a sense of duty and a sense of responsibility, which is very influential. And it's hard to say no when you're being targeted at specifically. And so that is the end of propaganda pieces in the countries around the world during World War I. So overall, we see that there's just a wide range of uses of propaganda, from an actual image to a film to a campaign, song, a poem. Propaganda is just can be used and it can be shaped in any way, form, whatever that the person wants. Whatever they feel will just influence more. And so propaganda in World War I was so huge and so extensive and so important in the war. Even Hitler recognized how important it was, and many probably did not give it as much importance as they should have, but it was just very huge and very influential. And as we saw, none of the countries had any similar propaganda. No one really had any sort of common motives. Everyone had different just political agendas going on. Everyone was targeting different issues. So it's just interesting to see, to sort of get a historical context of the World War just by seeing the pieces of propaganda. We're seeing what was important to that specific country at the time. And I think for many historians, propaganda is so important because it just gives a story in itself. You can learn so much about a country and about what's going on at the time to sort of understand what was at stake during the time and just get a bigger picture on history in itself by looking at these propaganda images. I know for myself, just doing this research, I learned a lot more and was able to connect a lot of things together, and seeing how France depicted Germany because of the hatred from the start of the war, how Britain was sort of trying to influence everyone and creating this sort of home front, how Australia was divided because of people that were of Irish descent, Russia and the start of this communism, the Bolshevik Revolution, and how this leads to the Cold War, and overall ideological war, a war of propaganda between communism and democracy, between just sort of what Russia believed and what America believed, and then Germany as well, that until the end of the war felt that they were not losing, and how censorship played such a big role in the United States that adopted this isolationism policy and tried to influence everyone into feeling this way as well, and then ended up joining the war and putting out an iconic piece. Propaganda in its entirety was very influential in this war and is a very interesting way to learn about the war and learn about the countries involved during the war. And so thank you for staying with this pretty long video and watching it. And